Good evening, everybody. This is Ronnie K. from New York. There's my partner at the top of the screen, Tommy A. out in New Mexico. Tommy, what the hell's going on in your end of the world?
Oh, man, had a wonderful week in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the Arson Investigators Conference. Unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate and didn't get any beach time in, which was probably a good thing. But was sad to see that not only you, but I did not make it to Shapiro's Deli in Indianapolis for a fine lunch during FDIC.
Yes, I know, and if perhaps we were both there, and of course, if Rich Marinucci was there, we would have dragged him along too, just to have some laughs and make him pay, So that's that. But yeah, we can't report on FDIC this year. We do it every year, Tommy and I. But Tommy had the Arson conference, and COVID came knocking on my door, took care of me, and then knocked my wife out of the box. So I had to cancel my trip at the last minute. But I did stream in and watch some of the ceremonies. It was dynamite. I want to get right to it, Tom. In terms of the show tonight, we want to welcome a couple of distinguished guests, if we may. We'll start with the senior guest on my screen. He's in my lower right hand corner. I would say he's the guy without hair, but everybody has no hair on this show, so it doesn't matter. Okay, but Chief Rich Marinucci, 47 years in the fire service, served the chief of 3 different fire departments in the state of Michigan. Past president of the IAFC. He was the acting chief operating officer for the fire administration. And then while serving, he was a senior advisor to the FEMA director. National program manager for the Everyone Goes Home program through the NFFF from 2008 to 2011. He's authored many books, Fire Chief's Guide to Administration and Management, and he was the editor of the 7th edition of the Fire Chief's Handbook. He called me and said, hey, I got a job for you that time. So I ended up doing a chapter for Rich. Chairman of the first Commission of Professional Credentialing, one of the first 15 fire officers to be designated in 2000, awarded the Ronnie Coleman Leadership Legacy Award. Very, very nice. Very cool. Lectured across the United States, Canada, around the world. He's been to Japan, Hong Kong, and Europe, spreading his gospel of fire safety and fire protection. He has a Master of Science from Eastern Michigan and a bachelor's from Western Michigan, and the University of Cincinnati. So, Rich Marinucci, welcome to the Backstep. If you want to say hi, and then I'm going to go to the other guests.
Hey, hi. Thanks for inviting me. You guys are both very good at what you do, and I consider it an honor to be asked to be on your show.
We're not great at what we do, but after we have you guys like you on the show, we get better. That's why you're here. You're here to make us better, all right? The other gentleman under my box, if we're looking at the same set of boxes, that's Chief Matt Tobia, currently chief of the city of Harrisonburg, Virginia. He's a 37-year student of the emergency services. I like the way you wrote that, Matt. He's been a student of the emergency services for 37 years. He has a bachelor's from the University of Maryland and a graduate of the Executive Fire Officer Program. Matt served as a member of the editorial board for Fire Rescue Magazine. He's authored over 120 articles. Former chair of the IAFC Safety and Health and Survival Section. Has the Chief Fire Officer credential. A member of the Institute of Fire Engineers. Before Harrisonburg, he served with the Anne Arundel County, Maryland Fire Department and the Loudoun County, Virginia Fire Department. He started his career volunteering in South Central Pennsylvania in 1987. Needless to say, Matt and I have a 23 or 24-year history with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. The time I spent in the command center working operations and then as the IC, Matt's been our family escort coordinator for many, many years and does it extremely well. His last credential, which I think is one of the most important to him, is he's a member of the staff for the Mid-Atlantic Burn Camp for Children. So, Matty, welcome to the Backstep, along with Rich. Thanks for being here, both of you guys. The theme this month is health and safety. I couldn't think of 2 better people to have on to talk about health and safety. With that, go ahead, Tommy.
I got to tell you that I've watched your career from afar for quite a while, but you were very inspirational to me in getting my chief fire officer credential. And even though I'm retired, I'm still paying them a hell of a lot of money to maintain it. But wanted to say thank you for doing what you do. And you've been inspiring me for quite some time. I'd say the same of Matt Tobia, but
I'm the
Good
rookie.
man.
Look, guys, I am absolutely the rookie in this group. Let's be clear about that. So, and usually I'm the old guy in my department. So the fact that I get to be the rookie in this show is outstanding. I'm honored to be present, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the sad thing is you're like the probie on this show. You're the kid.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Tommy's approaching 50 years. I hit 50 years in October, so we got some good experience on the show tonight, and I'm thrilled that you guys are here. So what I like to do is I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'll ask one of you to kind of give us your input on it, and then perhaps go to the other guest to see if you'd like to add anything. It was interesting. About 2 years ago, we had two chiefs on from New York City, Joe Jordan and Frank Lieb, and we were talking about instilling the fire prevention thing in the line people. The line firefighters have to have stake in that, right? And most of the stuff, like Frank would do a quick dissertation, and Joe said, "I agree with him. Next question." Like it was like, okay, so I can't top what he said, so give me the next one. So, but however you guys want to handle it's great. So I think the first question, and I'm going to start with Rich. The greatest threat to firefighter health and safety and wellness. What's the threat to trying to get the guys to buy in and to follow rules and all that stuff? What's your opinion on that?
Well, the greatest threat right now is obviously cancer. When I'm going around doing health and safety classes or incident safety officer, I'll ask the class how many have had a experienced line of duty death in their organization, and you get a few people, but it's not much. And then when you ask them, how many of you know somebody that got cancer while they were on that job or within 5 years of leaving the job, and every hand in the place goes up. Everybody knows somebody as a result of this. And, the statistics and the data continues to show that, it's the biggest risk we face right now.
So let me follow up with that. So the risk of cancer, that's everybody's talking about that now, which is a good thing. We're all talking about it, and people are writing about it. And so what's the other risk? The risk against getting the firefighters to buy in. What's the mental part of getting the firefighters to take stock in themselves, to wear their mask, wash their gear, all that stuff? Where's the wall? Because they build walls. I will tell you, I worked with a chief in Connecticut. We were talking about health and safety at a meeting one time, and he said he looked at his guys because he was trying to put rules and regs into motion, and he said, "I can't want this more than you." And he's spot on. I can't, and I took it. I stole it. And the next meeting I had with my officers, when I started saying, we got to start washing our gear, we got to do this, and they're kicking and screaming, and I used it also. I can't want this more than you. So what are the barriers, Rich? Where do you see the barriers, the mentality, or whatever you want to call it?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back to the overall culture of the organization, and then specifically down to the cultures of individual organizations, because the people get the most respect in an organization are those that get copied then by the younger group. So when you have people that are idolized for doing things that look really crazy or whatever, the younger generation is going to say that must be the way I have to behave so that I can fit in this particular organization. I'll use an example. I'll ask everybody in the class and say, how many of you ever been to a car fire? And they say, yeah, well, they all did, right? And I said, do you ever save one where they boarded it up and took it back to the shop and rebuilt it? And I said, no, where does it end up? It ends up in the trash yard, doesn't it? And, so we're risking ourselves. And then they ask them, say, well, is there any natural fibers left in a car anymore? Or is it all petroleum-based products and plastics that are giving off all these carcinogens? Yeah, so why are we doing this for a vehicle fire? And that's just a start, right? But for some reason, it comes back to the machoism and sort of whatever it is. And so it's how do we transition that culture so we get where we can still be aggressive, but we're not arbitrarily aggressive, but we're intellectual in our approach. And when we can make a difference, have at it. I don't want you to stop putting out fires. That's the safest thing you can do is put the fire out. But by the same token, stop coating yourself with carcinogens unnecessarily and putting yourself in harm's way when you don't have to, just because that's what your department says you're supposed to do.
Matt, you're the only right now. You're the only working chief of a fire department on the show. So how are you getting past those barriers? How are you breaking those walls down with your people?
Yeah, so for a very long time, the mindset I think of the fire service has been change their hearts and minds to change behavior. Right? Like if you just explain it well enough, they'll understand and they'll adopt the practices that you want them to adopt. And notoriously what we have found is that's an abject failure, right? So what we really are talking about is changing behavior to eventually change hearts and minds. And if we change hearts and minds, great. But on the front end, we're gonna demand a level of accountability around the basic concept that we love each other so much that we are willing to do whatever it takes to keep each other alive. Not because the rules and regulations say to, not because the NFPA standards say so, not because, policy or best practice says so, but because we love each other so much that we want to keep each other alive, right? So, we are very hard about demanding compliance with our expectations. And really that's that, what we're really doing there is combating normalization of deviance, right? You fall off the roof of a house, you break your leg, you see that injury instantaneously, right? If you are involved in a motor vehicle collision and you're injured, those are injuries that are seen right away. Cancer, for example, doesn't appear in that way. And so it isn't forefront of mind that that's going to be a consequence of normalization of deviance. So what we're really talking about is a level of accountability and a demand for compliance that is maybe unseen in the past. And, the fire service is doing better, like a lot better than 50 years ago. And it is a continuous cultural shift. But, you talk about, like Winston Churchill talks about, when do you give up, right? When do you stop talking about it? When do you feel like you've crossed the finish line? And the answer to that is never. Like, you never stop doing the things that you need to do to reduce preventable risks.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know what? In my last command in Connecticut, before I went back to the FDLI, my last command, when I was starting to hound the guys about, putting rules and regulations in safety, I remember my union president coming up to me one day and he said, Chief, he goes, you're carrying the banner for us. We appreciate that. But, we don't want to get cancer. We don't want to get sick. I said, well, then you got to do that by your actions, Dave. I said, you have to do it by your actions. I'm glad you don't want to get sick. That sounds like you're buying into the thing. So let's make it happen. Let's do it together, you and I, and convince the rest of the gang that we need to be taking measures,
Yeah, the word cancer right now in the fire service, the reason why you're seeing, I think, the reason why you're seeing so much energy around cancer is because in our society and in the fire service, the term cancer is equated with death. If you get cancer, you're going to die. And we hear that over and over and over again. And so it's giving an unparalleled level of attention to it. The byproduct of that, unfortunately, is that firefighters are looking for the one right thing that they can do or their chief can do to prevent them from getting cancer. And the reality is there is no way to prevent it 100%. But there are a huge number of things that in totality reduce the risk, right? And that's not me saying that. I'm just a dumb firefighter, right? That's the scientists saying that. That's the experts saying that. That's the people who actually know what they're talking about saying it is the totality of the effort that reduces the risk. There is no one thing that you can do, right? It's all of it.
Rich, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, you follow up. We pick and choose a little bit. Everybody's very much aware of PFAS in our turnout gear, and of course, everybody wants to fix that right now. But there's so many other things that contribute. As Matt was saying, there's a lot of different exposures, a lot of different things that we do. You ask people to say, "What's the most valuable resource on your fire department?" They'll tell you it's the firefighters. And then after a fire, what do you wash first? It's not the firefighters, in a lot of cases, right? So trying to get that. And then when you try to ask them, please set up a system that gets the carcinogens off you as quickly as possible. Well, what if we get another call? What if we get this? What if we get that? And there's always trying to make up some excuses in not taking care of our people. We need to take care of our people. And it's got to be more than just everybody goes home. I was part of that program for a long time. And And I stopped telling people everybody goes home. I said, that's not good enough. Everybody should retire and try to bankrupt the pension systems, live a long time after you leave the job. And the only way to do that is to take care of yourself while you're on the job and look at the little things. And Matt is spot on when he says we can't predict which exposure it was that caused that problem that you have. They caused you to get cancer. All we can do is give you examples of things you can do to minimize the chances you are going to get cancer. We can't eliminate it, but we can take certain things away. And that's where we got to keep going. And that's the selling point. And then the last thing I want to say is some of the things that we also need to do is the training piece and the education, and get away from, we got to be able to explain to the firefighters why we do things certain ways. And I think sometimes we get away from that training piece. And so it ties together, it's more than just telling them, but you got to have that discussion, and you got to get people engaged in the process. And through a good, solid training and education, you start to change people's approach to the job.
Yep, absolutely. Tommy, do you have something on this?
No, not particularly. I want to jump in on something after you guys get done with the cancer discussion.
Yeah, we're winding that down. So go ahead.
You know the way my mind works, or sometimes doesn't. But two recent events have come to mind: the Potomac River midair collision and that occurred back on January 29th. And then on the 31st, they had the med flight in Philadelphia that crashed into the Castor Gardens neighborhood. And I got to thinking of, some of the stuff that NTSB does in the way of investigations. And, but it kind of reminded me of some of the early work that Gary Brees did on crew resource management. And I'm interested to see whether CRM is going to play into any of the NTSB final report as to what were the human factors that were going on there that caused these two disasters to happen. And of course, I drug my my PDF copy of the CRM manual that IAFC did. Oh God, when was that? Back in early 90s, maybe? But one of the things I read there that kind of struck me kind of funny was the impetus for all that stuff happened in about July of '89. There was a United flight that crashed in Sioux City, Iowa.
United 232.
Yes, 111 killed and 184 survived. And the pilot attributed to what he learned during crew resource management training and to not wiping out everybody that was on that flight. But I think somebody had noted in the IAFC document that when they initially came up with the training, the senior pilots rejected it. They didn't want a thing to do with it. And I thought, are these guys in the fire service? Because it sounds really kind of familiar. And I'm wondering whether, and you don't see much published on it anymore, but maybe it's time to go back and revisit some of that stuff and look at the human factors and some of the other things that were discovered along the way and try to feed that back into training to, we're reducing the problem, but to try to eliminate it, I think we're going to have to do a much better job with it.
I agree with you. And you know what? The CRM stuff, my wife got into this habit of watching this show on the Smithsonian called Air Disasters. And it's all the big crashes in history and how NTSB investigated the crash. And crew resource management came from one of the crashes where there were 4 guys in the cockpit and they had a problem with the plane and nobody was flying the plane.
Yeah.
Nobody was flying the plane. It's like, wait a minute, and the other part was also where you had a lot of foreign country airlines where like the captain got the last word, he's it. Okay. And now he's having trouble and no one's saying anything to him. Like, by the way, we're losing altitude, and we're going down 3,000 feet a minute. Everybody's afraid to say anything. So and they still talk about it. We still watch it, and we're picking up other things on it. But that's 50% or 40% of those big crashes came from that they weren't using that crew resource management. I think the fire service got good at it because we even tell our probies, and we tell everybody, if you see something, say something, like the cops do. But I remember telling brand new kids coming into my departments, your first day here, if you happen to be somewhere at a fire in the next 24 hours and you see something, tell somebody. If you should recognize that a roof is spongy, or the fire's coming through the roof, and nobody sees it, nobody's yelling, you don't hear anything on your radio, tap somebody on the shoulder and say, look, there's fire coming through the roof, or whatever. Speak up. Everybody's deputized to speak up.
I've always been an advocate, especially if you're doing just like some simple coffee table training. Grab a NIOSH report and start looking at the recommendations in there and some of the failures that occurred. And it kind of blew my doors off that that's suffering from what it is right now. And I'm hoping that when funding gets reinstated, but that's such an important learning tool. And then factoring in to say, hey, let's look at this from the human factor side of it and see what was going wrong. Or, I think communications pops up in every one of those. And something that crew resource management kind of highlights is the importance of that.
There's a funny story about NIOSH and the firefighter fatality reports. And, one of the criticisms that NIOSH continuously got was that they kept producing the same report over and over and over again. And there was a big national meeting that was being held, and there was a director from the NIOSH program. And finally he had enough. He's like, if you guys would stop killing firefighters the same way, we'd write the report differently. And, and the top 5 things are the top 5 things. And communications is one of the top 5. And the other big in the top 5 is task saturation. And that's how CRM, that's where CRM ties in directly to reducing that task saturation. Because, an incident commander or a company officer will get saturated with information, and key messages will get missed. And even if they get acknowledged, they don't pass through into the conscious brain. They get subconsciously acknowledged, but they don't get consciously acknowledged. And so what you see are instances where even radio transmissions will be made acknowledging a problem and not reacted to. And that's how you know that somebody is in that task saturation zone, yep. Right? But I thought it was very telling that this guy from NIOSH said, if you guys would quit killing firefighters the same way, we'd write a different report.
Well, there's truth to that. There's truth to that. I want to shift gears to something else. One of the questions we have down is the culture versus the culture of safe extinguishment. That's safety versus extinguishment. Rich, you quoted before when you said about being intellectual and not arbitrary. I heard Dave Dotson use that phrase on an Everyone Goes Home video a couple of years back. He talked about being aggressive interior firefighters, and he said we need to be intellectually aggressive, not arbitrarily aggressive. And I think that should be hanging up in every firehouse in the United States. That one quote. We need to be intellectually aggressive, not arbitrarily aggressive, and I think we'll do better. So when we talk about safety versus extinguishment, drawing the lines, we listen, the pendulum swung the other way. We know that over the last 20, 25 years, the pendulum swung, and then it swung so far that the hardened, battle-hardened, filthy firefighters from the street around the country were screaming at FDIC, no, this safety thing doesn't work. We swore to protect and all that other stuff. But I think it's come back toward the middle a little bit, where we just have to work smarter and take a couple of seconds and evaluate. My buddy, I hate doing that. When I always say my buddy, I forget the guy's name. Steve Marsaw, who's a battalion chief in the city, he wrote a graduate paper at the EFO, at the NFA, and it was called Survivability Profiling. And it's just taking that extra 10 seconds and looking at the building and saying, can we get in? And are the people still alive? And I always use the example, 2.5-story frame house, there's fire out of every single window at 3:00 in the morning. What's the chance the people are still alive in that house? So his thing is, let's just take another 10 seconds and see if in fact we can get in the door because it's too hot. And what's the chances are that if we can't get in with turnout gear and those people are wearing pajamas, and that kind of stuff. So I'd like your input. Rich, I'm going to start with you about safety versus extinguishing versus being aggressive, and where do we draw that line, and how do we come to a middle ground?
Well, it's first of all, thanks for giving Dave credit for saying that, because that's why I heard it first too. And Dave has done a great job of educating a lot of folks along the way. But in order to become intellectually aggressive, you have to become better trained and better educated so that you can make good, sound decisions, just as you were saying, so that you will recognize what's going on. We see too many times people automatically doing the same things over and over again. They're in a certain mindset when they get off the fire truck, and they don't take that extra couple of seconds to look at the building and to look at the fire and see exactly what's happening in that particular case. One of the things related to education and training is trying to stay up to speed. Oftentimes you'll ask people how important it is to know something about the building construction features. And they'll say it's really, really important. Then you'll ask them, when was the last time you had a class on any type of building construction? They'll say it was recruit school, whenever that happened to be. And then you do the same thing with fire behavior. And they say it's really important to understand how that works. And then again, we haven't revisited it once we got into our career. So we have two very critical elements that are going to predict what's going to happen during a fire: the features of the building and the contents of the building and the smoke and the fire that's being generated. Yet we're not going back and revisiting it. Yet we can tell you in the last 5, 10, 15 years, the differences in building construction features are great. And so you can't use necessarily the same approach to be aggressive. You can be aggressive, but it can't be the same version of aggressive firefighting, because you're going to fall through the floor or you're going to fall through the roof, because it's lightweight construction that's failing in 5 to 10 minutes after it's being impinged upon by fire. So if we don't start teaching people this, they can't be intellectually aggressive.
Matty, before I bring you in, you hit a great point about when's the last time you talked about that, or when's the last time you studied that, or when's the last time. I've been asking that question so long, and where I use that the most is when we get new kids into the firehouse, and I'd say to the existing guys, the old timers, the medium timers, the senior guy, I said, ask this kid a lot of questions. He just got done at the fire academy. He just spent 16 weeks. He's up to speed on, and at the time, how to cut apart an electric car, where the bad cable is so you don't zap yourself, right? All of that, just everything. Fire behavior, the new material, all that stuff. Talk to the kid. See what he has to say. Don't shut him out, because he's the one who, and I'd say, when the last time you guys cracked open the essentials of firefighting? And 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, whatever. So I think that's a key point, is that we don't, and a lot of people kind of scream that back to basics, and they do some facsimile of what they believe back to basics is. There was one time at one of my departments, we decided we were going to do a back to basics. I had the guys pulling up, hitting a hydrant, stretching a line. They were looking at me like, are you crazy? I said, yeah, you're going to do it till you get it right. When's the last time you did that? Well, we did it, 3 months ago. We had a fire, whatever. No, this is back to basics, muscle memory, all that other stuff. Matt Tobia.
Yeah, in 2004, a group of people got together in Tampa with the goal of reducing preventable line of duty deaths, right? 2004. And out of that came the 16 life safety initiatives and the Everyone Goes Home program. And that had a seismic shift in the fire service. Just like you'll remember in 1985, when NFPA 1500 came out, it also represented a seismic shift in the fire service. And, the hue and cry that went up when 1500 came out, and Bruno was the original, chair of that. People were like, you're going to kill the fire service as we know it. You're going to destroy the fire service as we know it. And you know what? It did. We figured it out. We got better, right? Firefighters are alive today because of the work that was done then. But at the time, it was it was going to spell the end of the American fire service as we know it. At the time, it sounds crazy to say this, but in 1985, fire chiefs were ordering fire apparatus as quick as they could before NFPA 1500 took effect in 1987, because it meant that they were going to have to buy enclosed cab fire apparatus, and they didn't want to pay the extra money. Can you imagine what would happen if you backed an open cab fire engine into your firehouse today and told the guys to ride on it? That the grievances would go up like crazy, right? Like, no way, we're not riding it. It's not safe. There's no way, we can't do it. Are you trying to kill us? Same thing happened in 2004, right? 2004, 16 life safety initiatives. No one in that room ever for 1 second thought that we were going to get the number to zero. What we hope to do, and what I think we've done over the course of the last 21 years, is reduce preventable line of duty deaths. And a huge amount of line of duty deaths are in fact preventable. And we can do better. We will never eliminate line of duty deaths because there are risks that we cannot control, right? There is manageable risk and there is risk beyond our control. The only way to have zero risk is to not go on calls. And Lord knows we're not going to do that, right? So how do we manage that risk? This, what you have seen is you have the extremists on both sides, right? You have the extinguishment extremists, you got the safety extremists, and they're all screaming at each other. No one's listening to each other. And then the 80% of rational firefighters are trying to live somewhere in the middle of that and figure out what is the best way to do things. What I tell people all the time is when you do the little things right, the big things go well. When you do the little things wrong, the big things do not go well. And so when you do every single little thing correctly and you have attention to detail and you are focused on being a student of the craft, that is what allows you to be intellectually aggressive when you are making decisions about going out on the ragged edge of risk versus benefit.
Yep,
There's people out there who are like, everyone goes home is the dumbest thing ever because that can't possibly be a legitimate mantra. You really think for 1 second that the guys and gals who were in Tampa in 2004 actually believe that everyone's going to go home? It's a mindset, right? It's like saying practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Vince Lombardi never expected perfection, but he knew that in striving for perfection, he was going to get excellence. And that's what it takes to be a winning team in football. The same thing is true in the fire service. You strive for perfection, knowing that you're never going to achieve it. But in doing so, you are going to significantly reduce preventable LODDs. And that's where rationality needs to come in.
Matt, I got to hit you up with a question. A couple months ago, Ron and I had Billy Goldfeder on the show, and it was all
how did you recognize him? I'm just curious.
We got talking about some of the initial, the world's coming to an end when 1500 got adopted, and we were talking about the changes to the OSHA standard that were coming up. What are you guys doing to make sure that you're at least trying to comply with some of the changes that are in the new standard?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the OSHA, the proposed OSHA emergency response regs, and those, obviously those are still in draft form. They have, the IFC is recommending a 10-year implementation window for those regulations so that everybody has time to evaluate them and adopt them. But the overwhelming majority of what is identified in the new OSHA regs are actually borrowed from 1500 and have already been in place in the fire service for literally decades. Yep. And this is common sense stuff. Like, you probably ought to pre-plan target hazards, and you probably ought to be using an incident management system, and you probably ought to have, standard operating guidelines, procedures for how you're going to mitigate whatever emergency it is that you're going to get called to as a fire department, right? And all of that starts with what are the risks in your community, and which ones are you going to respond to, right? And what are you going to provide? So the OSHA regs are they are the latest in a series of efforts to dramatically ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable to do the things that we say we're committed to.
Yeah, Rich, would you like to follow up on the OSHA stuff a little bit? Is that something that you dove into?
We talk a little bit about the OSHA standards and what they go and what people really know and what they don't know. I think, as all of you have been saying, we have that initial overreaction to anything that might change the way we do things, but it only gets implemented on us because we forgot to listen, or we started doing, what I tell people, dumb things. We do stuff that we shouldn't be doing. Common sense would tell you don't do it. And I don't know if it's something in our genetics that tells us we're supposed to do that. I'm not really sure all the time. I had a student one time, give me an example. He said, he asked the question sort of rhetorically, is firefighting dangerous or is it risky? And he said, it depends how much you know. He said, think of some of the things that you do. This particular individual happened to be a surfer, and he said, is surfing dangerous or risky? He says, if you know what you're doing, it's still risky to go out there. If I was to take out a surfboard, it would be dangerous. I would hurt myself. And so you start thinking about it from that perspective. The more you understand about your job, the safer it's going to be. But it's still going to be risky, as Matt was saying. We can't get rid of all those risks. But what we can transition from is something that's dangerous to now risky, and then try to manage those risks. And that's what the OSHA standards are trying to do, is to try and get us to look at it. And we don't even pay attention to it. Some of the things that are currently in the OSHA standards, we totally disregard because we don't understand them and we don't bother to check on them. For example, OSHA gives us a pass when you're on the scene of an emergency. You can do almost anything if the house is on fire. You can do it. But it says once you no longer have an emergency, you're supposed to play by the OSHA rules. So if you're in a training session, it's not considered an emergency. So your risk level, your risk taking, according to OSHA, should be extremely low. You should have redundancy and safety systems and everything else. If we're going to start practicing climbing out in an emergency business to get out on a ladder, there's got to be some fall protection when we're doing those sorts of things. That's what the OSHA standard says. And it makes sense. Why are we making people do something that if they make an error in training, we don't have a backup that says, okay, you made a mistake this time, but you at least didn't hurt anything. You can try it again and keep practicing. We shouldn't be doing things like that. But we, even all across the board, we are very good. If I may, just one more thing, in the OSHA standards with respect to EMS calls. We don't have too much problems convincing firefighters to put on their gloves and safety equipment and wash their hands because they're so worried about somebody else's body fluids getting on them, right? You can't go on an EMS call with firefighters where everybody that's leaving the station's got gloves on and they're protecting themselves and they're taking the gloves off carefully. And if they need to, they'll put on a gown, they'll put on a mask, they'll do all these sorts of things. Yet now they're going to go into a toxic environment with the same sorts of hazards. Doesn't seem to bother them. I don't need to put my gloves on yet, or I don't need to wash my hands when I get done, or I don't need to clean myself off because, when I got smoke on it. So we have to look at it from that perspective. Look at it, we have the ability to do it. It's clear that we can follow the rules because we do it on the EMS side when OSHA says it. But yet we have a tendency to say firefighting is different, and maybe it's not so different.
Rich, I think you make a point. One of the things I laid on my guys when we were getting into all of this stuff was we should start treating a fire like a hazmat job, because it is. Because it is. What do? We get to a hazmat. Hazmat's a hurry up and wait, right?
Right.
Somebody said years ago we should take the license sirens off every hazmat truck in the country because they get there and it takes them an hour to get in the building, right? So just get there. But what do we do with a hazmat job? We glove up, we double glove, we tape in, we're doing all this stuff.
Right.
Okay. And it takes 40 minutes to get dressed and get in. But we're loaded with hazardous materials on us and that we know about. Like The four of us didn't know shit before 20 years ago. We didn't know any of this stuff. But now we know. Now we know. And that's the point that I've been trying to make, since this all came about, was we know it's here. We didn't know any better. You don't know what you don't know, like they say. We didn't know any better. So, we rode back in a closed cab with the heat on, and we don't know it's off gassing the gear and all that other stuff. But now we know. Right. So take your gear off, throw it on the hose bed, and ride back in your clothes. So bring an extra jacket to put on, and then get it into the machine, or do a rough decon before you leave the scene, kind of thing. So I think it's gonna get better, but it's that whole thing. It's like turning around an aircraft carrier, man. It's slow. Yeah. It's not.
Well, your hazmat analogy is great in relation to OSHA. OSHA says if you're going to go to hazmat, you got to play by our rules.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And they're saying you got to have a safety officer. You
1910.
You got to put your proper gear on. You got to have hot zones, cold zones, warm zones. You got to decon when you're done. Everything else, right? In the hazmat.
1910 120 is black and white. 1910 120 is black and white, man. There's no difference. Tommy, you got a question for our extinguished panel?
Yeah, and it kind of relates to NFPA 1582, and I'm curious about firefighter physicals and whether you gentlemen think that is the gold standard, or is there more that we should be doing in providing the medical screening and the physicals for our folks? And Matty, I'll hit you up first on that.
Yeah, the 1582 standards, like all of the NFPA standards, are consensus standards. They are, you get a team together, and it's what everyone in the team can agree on to move forward, as a practice. I think 1582 physicals are outstanding. I think every single firefighter in America, regardless of whether they're career volunteer, wildland, ARF, doesn't matter. Every single firefighter should be getting a 1582 physical. But the one thing that I got to say is it is a minimum standard. It is definitely not a gold standard. And I'll give you the best example I can. There are firefighters who have successfully passed their annual 1582 physical, including a stress test, and at some point shortly thereafter suffer a fatal cardiac event. And, Rick Gentlecore in Montgomery County is a good example. This guy was a star athlete in high school, had a great career in the fire service, got an annual physical every year in a very high-performing department. But the reality is that NFPA 1582 standard is not sensitive enough to pick up occult coronary vessel disease that may exist within a firefighter. So additional screenings like calcium score CTs, which are very low cost, less than $100, and 3D echocardiograms, also not particularly expensive, are two examples of things that can be done to reduce the risk of a cardiac event further, right? The leading cause of firefighter fatalities among a generally accepted standard right now, leading cause of death is still cardiac events. We know that cancer is an emerging issue, not minimizing the risks associated with that, but this is an example where additional testing is available and could be embraced by departments that have the capacity to do so, to even reduce that risk further. So calcium score CTs, 3D echocardiograms, in the cancer realm, there are plenty of aspects of 1582 that do in fact test for cancers. They are not, it is not comprehensive. The Gallery test, which is a blood test that evaluates shed mRNA in the bloodstream of active cancer cells, is a very effective strategy for, again, identifying very difficult to diagnose cancers. Pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer are two of the most difficult cancers to diagnose. And the Gallery test is a step, again, in that direction. Not currently FDA approved, not currently covered by insurances. So there is an out-of-pocket cost for fire departments to embrace that. But that is definitely one strategy for reducing preventable risk.
Rich?
To slightly add on to that, because obviously Matt's got that down pretty good, and he's mentioned about the additional tests that we should be giving to our firefighters because they help to predict a bit more. As we said earlier in this discussion, we can't make it 100%, right? We're not going to catch everything, but as we add some of these testings in, but one of the things that we have to also do is educate our firefighters to look after their fellow firefighters. When you see a line of duty death report related to cardiac, they're very, very similar. It's at the end of a call, the end of a shift, somebody says, I don't feel so good, and I'm going to go home and lay down, or I'm going to go back in the bunker room and lay down, and then they don't wake up. And we have to start looking at when somebody says that, there should be a trigger word that says, I'm going to look at you. You don't look the same as you do every time you come into shift work with us. I know who my partners are. I know the people that work on my shift. You don't look exactly the same. We're going to do a little bit of a workup here. We're going to do some simple vital signs. And if they're not right, guess what? We're taking you to the hospital to get you. And so that's the other half of that. Besides the annual physicals, we have to also encourage our folks to pay attention to what I think have become trigger words that indicate that somebody's not feeling so good. And if we leave them alone, we could be having a disaster in our organization. So I think that's part of that continuation of the training and education we got to give our folks.
That's a great point. That's a great, because how many line of duties we see every year that the guy went in the bunk room and didn't come out, so I think that's, and it fits into what we're talking about now with behavioral health, about keeping an eye on each other and knowing how that guy normally behaves and all that in that kind of, and you know what? And this isn't, it's not reserved for career departments. When you talk about shifts, the volunteers, you come back from a job, and Mikey says, geez, I feel like crap. Well, don't just let Mikey go home, and you make a great point, Rich, about, no one knows the guys better than the guys or the gals, guys and gals. The people they're the people who know each other the best. So I think that's really a terrific point. So let's kind of shift a little bit and talk about working unsafely on the fire ground, unsafe acts. What leads our people to do that? Why did they do it? What are we seeing lately? And again, we're always looking for remedies on how we combat that. It's always a combat thing, right? How do we combat that? How do we combat? But it is, and it could be anything from old habits die hard to whatever, or learning something that you thought was good and it's not. But Maddie, I'm going to start with you again. Tommy, I'm sorry, Tom.
I think Rich mentioned it before. You look at the various cultures, and while there is, you could say, a culture that transgresses all fire departments, but when it comes to the culture of safety, everybody's very different, and what's acceptable in one department is certainly not going to be acceptable in another. But try to recognize. And of course, trying to change culture, Ron, I think you used the analogy of trying to, turn the ship around quickly. That ain't going to happen. So I think recognizing that may lead to maybe reducing some of that. Yeah, well, you know what? Doesn't matter what I think. Maddie, you're our working chief on the show today. So how are you combating all of that stuff?
Yeah, for us, it's a relentless pursuit of compliance, right? Like there's no point at which we're not talking about, like holding each other accountable and holding ourselves accountable. The other day, I'll just tell you, the other day I'm at a fire, right? The fire's over, right? It's out, it's over. We're packing up, we're putting everything away, right? And I'm there. I got a ball cap on. I got my coat on. I got my gloves on, and I got a single length ladder against the building. Right. And I'm like, no one else is around. I'm like, I'll just take this ladder down. Right. And I'll put it away. So I take I'm taking the ladder down. It's a single length ladder. Right. Like who cares? Right. And I've got like my coat and my gloves on. Right. And a lieutenant comes around the corner and his eyes get about this big. And I'm like, what? He's like, you forget your helmet? I'm like, yep. I sure did. And so his willingness to hold me accountable, right? Because that ladder comes down, right? I lose my footing, something happens, ladder comes down, cracks me in the head, right? if I'm lucky, it's the least important part of my body. So if I'm lucky, all I have are stitches, right? Something serious happens, right? The other thing is, if I'm doing it, it must be okay for everybody else to be doing it that way,
Absolutely.
right? So you got to lead by example. So that lieutenant knew that he had the authority to tell me, the fire chief, hey, chief, put your helmet on. You know what I did? Put my helmet on. You know, like everybody is susceptible to normalization of deviance, right?
Yes,
the
absolutely.
gap between what is expected and what we're doing, right? And that becomes invisible. That gap becomes invisible to us over time because nothing bad happens, right? If I take that ladder down and nothing bad happens, it begins to build that loop that I can do that over and over and over again, right? And, you know, those examples in the fire service, normalization of deviance, abound. There are so many LODDs where firefighters in burning buildings, you know, are doing things that they have always done and never gotten caught. And then they get caught. Right.
Yeah, they're not just for the people watching the broadcast. The normalization deviance comes from NASA. Okay. And when the Challenger blew up, they knew the O-rings were getting bad and on the solid booster rockets. And they had a 0.52 inches where it would pop a little bit on liftoff. And they kept moving that bar. So they deviated from their normal, what they said they would do, until it got so far where a minute and 17 seconds, she blew up off the launch pad and killed all the astronauts. So that normalization of deviance, that happens here in the fire service. You know, the last time we saw that big, I think it was 2015. There was the footage went around the country. The captain running across the terracotta roof in California, and he falls through. Okay, and he ends up dying eventually. And all the firemen said the same thing that were at the scene. He's done that thousands of times. My buddy Mike Mullane, who's a NASA astronaut and flew the shuttle 3 times, said to me on the phone after a couple of things that happened, we talked to each other. He said, Ron, I call that false feedback. It's false feedback. When you do something bad and nothing happens, all right, this must be okay. I'll do it again. This must be okay. False feedback. That's what's killing some of our people. Not all of them, but some of them. Rich, would you like to jump in on this?
Well, a couple of things to add on. As usual, Matt's spot on in his pictures. We also have a case where everybody has such pre-established policies and procedures of what people are going to do. It's almost like they go into autopilot. You know, when I'm riding on the fire truck, and it was a long time ago when I was riding backwards, but I knew what I was going to do when I got to that fire. I was going to get off that fire truck. I was going to put my air pack on. I was going to grab the hose off it, and I was going to go to the front door. And it was every single time without taking a second or two to look at, is that the right way to go in? Or if I was working that thing, what do truck people do? You got to go up on the roof. Even if you don't need to be there, that's what our culture is telling us to do. Okay, if you're coming and you're expected to do this, you need to get up on the roof. And we see that on so often where people automatically do that every single time because that's what their standard operating procedures say they're supposed to do. I think, we talked about what can you do and what's contributing factors. Look at the different C's that we talk about. We talked about the culture a bit, and Matt talked about compliance. And I would say competence is another one of those areas that maybe sometimes we're not quite as competent as we think we are because we don't measure it. We don't test ourselves, and we don't maintain it. Ronnie, you said that earlier. Somebody was in a fire, or stretched some hose 3, 4, 6 months ago, and they think it's going to stay with them forever, and they don't think they have to practice it, keep their level of competence up. So that's one of the things. The other thing is complacency, and Matt was alluding to that. That's part of the normalization of deviance, is because we get complacent. Been to the same call how many times? It's okay, rooming contest, whatever, and then we get to that one spot where it's not the same, and that's when something goes sideways because we were a little bit complacent in our approach. We didn't take it seriously, and we still have a lot of cocky firefighters out there. They think they know everything. They've got it all nailed down, and they don't think anything bad can ever happen to them. Nobody ever goes to a fire and says, "I'm going to do something today that's going to get me seriously hurt or killed." Nobody ever expects it to happen to them. But it does, right? Somebody that dies in line of duty, they didn't go to work that day thinking that was going to be their last day at work, and something bad happened to them. There are times when we can't control certain things, but there are so many. Just watch the videos, and you only see in 2 dimensions. You don't always get the full story, but you watch a lot of videos out there of people doing things that you have to question. What are they doing? Why are they exposing themselves to this risk at this particular point in the fire? And if you look at those issues, we can attack it.
A couple of years back, when I was working in Connecticut as a chief, we had a mill, an old heavy timber mill. It was abandoned a long time, and magically it went on fire one night on a Saturday night. So county call, everybody's there. We sent our guys, and then I went and I connected with the chief. I says, "You want me? I'll be your safety officer." He said, "Please." So got my gear on. I'm walking around, and there's a fence at the end of the yard, and it's another gate to get more apparatus in a different side. So I see 2 guys with a K-12, and they're cutting through a lock about that big, one of them case-hardened steel locks. And the corner of my eye, I look at them, no shields, no goggles, no gloves, both guys. So I walk over and I tap them on the shoulder, and I said, "Stop the saw." They stopped the saw. 2 firefighters from another department, wasn't my guys. And I said to them, "It's 2:00 in the morning. This place is rocking and rolling." I said to them, "What can't you buy in Amazon? What can't you get from Amazon?" And they're looking at me like I got 4 heads. Like, this chief is nuts. You can get everything at Amazon. "Oh, no, they don't sell eyes." I said to them, "They don't sell eyes. You can't order another set of eyes from Amazon. They don't have that. Put your goggles on, put your gloves on, put your face shields down, go back to work." "Yes, chief." "Okay." It's the same. It's that same thing you're talking about. I get it. We're getting near the end of our hour. A couple of things. We do a few things at the end of our hour. We have Ronnie and Tommy's book club. So, Tom, I'm not reading anything super cool other than a book called 1776 right at the moment about our independence. But, Tommy, you got something you want to share with the gang?
Yeah, and usually I try, if I'm teaching at the academy or, we talk about what's in your library and what you should be looking at. And, today talking about safety, 2 things came to mind. Is there a text you would recommend on how to be a good safety officer? And then where do you get the tools to do that? Well, if you want to be a good safety officer, get a hold of Dave Dotson's text on being a good safety officer and read that. After you become proficient in what Dave's telling you here, you want to start looking for your toolbox. And I'll be a little shameful, but get this one. You want the stuff you need to be a good safety officer? Chief Kanterman's book is full of it, from policies and procedures, SOPs, and the stuff you need to make sure you're taking that proficiency and being able to assimilate it into your departments. 2 great reads, and I highly recommend them.
So that's not the first time you told me I'm full of it. So thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Tommy, you got a roll call for us tonight?
Yeah, and it was kind of weird. We were last on the air on March 13th. And according to the USFA website, there's only been 2 line of duty deaths since then. And I'm not sure whether the count's accurate, because I don't know if anybody's left at the fire administration right now to input that data. But back on April 4th, Chevy Gale from Buford, Missouri was killed in a vehicle crash while responding. And this one kind of tore at my heartstrings. Chevy was 16 years old and was responding, I think, to a water rescue call when the vehicle collision occurred. The second line of duty death occurred on April 5th from Roy Smith from Staunton, Indiana, and again, another vehicle crash. And those are the only 2 we have, Ron. As always, we ask you to keep the fallen and their families in your thoughts and prayers, and heed the lessons that they have left behind for us.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to go to final thoughts, and then we got one quick thing right after final thoughts. Rich Marinucci, final thoughts on today.
Yeah, if you could send one message on trying to improve health and safety of firefighters, keep getting your education, keep getting your training, stay on top of the game. The industry's changing so quick. Pay attention to what's going on, learn as much as you can. The more you know, the better decisions you're going to make, and you can then stay intellectually aggressive in your approach to this job and get rid of the arbitrary stuff that we're doing.
Great. Thank you. Matty?
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for the opportunity to spend some time with a bunch of really great thought leaders in the fire service. As always, I learned a lot every time I'm around really smart people, so thanks very much. For me, I think it's funny, right? So for me, the thing that I'll say is, and Chief, you mentioned this, I'm the guy right now that's a working fire chief, right? Which means if one of my people get killed in the line of duty, the only person that's going to have to go to their house and tell that family that they're not coming home alive is me. So I wear that obligation very, very seriously. And that helps really focus prioritization of responsibilities, right? Like there's all these things going on. There's all these competing priorities. The only priority that I am always focused on ahead of everything else is what is going to be the greatest likelihood that my people are going to go home alive. And leadership requires that you actually lead, not do the things that are comfortable, but do the things that are going to make an impact on leaving the fire service better than we found it, right? Like that's our job. Our job is not just to be, caretakers. Our job is to be stewards of the fire service and leave it better than we found it. And I think that's what all of us are trying to do. So, combat normalization of deviance, strive for perfection in everything we do, demonstrate compassion towards each other, and take care of each other.
Great. Thank you both. So with thanks to my friend Mike Colon, Mike does a podcast. It's called Mic'd Up in New Haven. He's from New Haven, Connecticut. He interviewed me a couple of months back. We had a really good time. And then he did something called the lightning round at the end. So Matty, I'm going to start with you. You ready? And you can't. Yep. I want to hear the answer. Don't thinking about it. Just tell me, right?
Okay. Ready? Here we go.
What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Blue. What's your favorite fire truck color?
Red.
Favorite late night snack?
Ice cream.
Favorite firehouse meal?
Spaghetti.
Okay. What's your favorite chain restaurant?
Chain restaurant. Outback.
Okay. What's your favorite type of place or style of food to eat out? If you want to go to a restaurant, what do you like to go out?
Diner. Jeannie and I love going to diners.
Okay. Well, you're a real New Yorker, that's for sure. Favorite sports team?
Green Bay Packers.
Okay. What's your comfort food?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Again. What's your favorite animal?
Dogs.
Dog. Engine or truck?
Oh, truck.
Okay, so knowing what you know now after 37 years in, if you can go back in time, what advice would you give to a 20-year-old version of you?
Shut up and listen more.
The last guy said that too. Remember Tommy?
Yep.
Yeah. Shut up and listen more.
Tommy, you got the list? You want me to take care of Richie?
I got it right here.
All right.
That could be the same questions, is it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh,
let's go.
Geez.
You're on. Hot seat.
Can I go ditto then? Can I just go ditto?
No dittos. No dittos. No.
What's your favorite fire truck color?
It's got to be red.
Okay. Favorite late night snack?
Probably ice cream.
What's your favorite firehouse meal?
Anything Italian. Probably lasagna when somebody's really ambitious.
What's your favorite sports team?
Detroit Lions.
Your favorite animal?
Dog.
Engine or truck?
Engine.
And again, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself if you can go back 20 years?
Wow. Like 20 years or 40 or 50?
When you were 20. When you were 20.
Oh, when I was 20. Okay.
What do you want to tell 20-year-old Rich Marinucci?
I want to tell them, you got to start listening to the folks that know more, but more importantly, make sure you hook up with people that have your best interest in mind.
Excellent. Outstanding. Gentlemen, this was an absolute treat. Matty, Rich, great having you guys with us on the Backstep. Hopefully our viewing audience learned a few things. You guys said a lot of profound stuff. And for us, for Tommy and I, our thing is if they hear something on a podcast and it sounds really good, just go back and start the discussion. If they heard one thing, whether it's decon at the scene, whether it's 1582 as a minimum standard, whatever they heard, just go back, ladies and gentlemen, and start the discussion. If you're a line firefighter, talk about it with your crew, with your officer. Maybe it'll bump up. You never know what's going to make a difference. So with that, we're getting ready to go here. We'll be up on the Backstep again next month. Don't forget, be safe, slow down, use your head, buckle up, eat right, eat light, stop for red. Watch how you drive, arrive alive, and hug your kids and your wife when you say goodnight, and your husband and your boyfriends and your girlfriends, and hug everybody before you say goodnight. Tell them you love them. Fire service, this is our love fest here, and we want everybody to come back again up on the Backstep. So with that, we're going to say goodnight. We'll see you real soon. Be safe.